Hey, leaders. In this episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration, Kurtis and I are joined by Casey Watts, founder of Casey Watts Coaching and Consulting, and a thought leader in team leadership. Casey brings over 20 years of experience in education, having served as a classroom teacher, adjunct professor, academic coordinator, and district instructional specialist. In today's conversation, we're thrilled to dive into Casey's expertise as she shares how leaders can empower their teams to break free from silos and transform into cohesive, vision-driven powerhouses. With her strategic guidance and practical tools, Casey helps leaders foster clarity, collaboration, and a collective purpose that drives meaningful results. So let's get started.
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration. As always, I'm Kurtis Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning.
And I'm Lorna Hewson.
So today, we're joined by Casey Watts. Casey's passion for helping teams achieve their full potential is truly inspiring and can't wait to hear her insights. We also know that this has been an exciting start to 2025 for Casey as we're recording this episode in mid-January and you just engaged in your 100th episode of your podcast and a brand new book that was just released a few weeks ago. We can't wait to hear about all of that. So welcome, Casey.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm really excited about talking all about a culture of collaboration. Love, love, love your topic. It's so profound, exciting, and needed in education.
Oh,
Absolutely.
We couldn't agree more. That is one of our driving mantras is we have to break this profession down away from individualism and isolation in classrooms to truly cohesive team. So before we jump into the how, let's just do a little bit of rewind for us, Casey. And what have been your experiences that have brought you from the classroom to where you're at today?
Yeah, I was in the classroom for about 15 years and I always knew, I'm just one of those people. I say, you know what, when I get to this time period or get to this many years, this is what I want to do next. And so I kind of stuck to that. And I moved out of the classroom to go into instructional leadership just because I wanted to have a broader impact on what teachers could do for their students. And I had so many desires that I couldn't fulfill while being in the classroom. Like, I believe in being a 360-degree leader, but at the same time, I felt like there was only so much I could do in where I was. And I
had a similar experience to jump in there, Casey, and I don't think it changed the driving purpose, but just how the purpose of, I want to make a difference for kids. And when you're in a classroom, you can do that for your 25, 30, whatever that number is. But then you reach a place of, how could I impact more?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I talk about this with some of my friends pretty frequently. When you get to this position where you're doing consulting and speaking and writing, you have a group of people who are like, oh my gosh, how did you get to where you are? I want to know, how you did that. How can I go about doing that? And I think sometimes there are people who, and I'm totally going off on a tangent. I hope you're okay with that.
Oh, this is great.
I think there sometimes are people who are born to be classroom teachers. That is what they feel their calling is. That's what they're masterful at. And that's what they love to do and want to do. And I am a proponent of that. If that is what brings you great joy, I don't feel like we should feel as though we have to climb the ladder. And, the other day I was thinking about this in the car. I'd love to do an episode on it, but I want to change our thought processes about climbing the ladder and think about taking that ladder down as almost as though it's like this linear trajectory. And there are different points along this lateral ladder, this horizontal ladder. And at each point, you might climb up, but it's for personal growth only. I've reached this point in this part of my career. I'm going to keep climbing because that's what I want for me. And then I'm going to go to the next part of my journey, which is not positional. It's just there's something different for me, and that's okay. So that's how it has been for me. I love, love, love change. Not everyone loves change, but I'm just one of those crazy people who loves change. And so I like to try out different things, and I like to figure out how, in what different ways can I have a broader impact, and how can I multiply the intelligence in the people around me. And when I was in the classroom, I could do that with my students, but I wanted to be able to do that with adults and help them to see, like, this is how we can collaborate. This is how you can grow as a professional and reach that, next personal growth point for yourself. And so that just blossomed over time. So I moved into instructional leadership, and I have since been doing a lot of consulting outside of my work as a district instructional leader. And coming soon, June, I am resigning officially from my role as instructional leader at my district, and I'm going full-time speaking, consulting, and writing. So super excited about it. Yeah, it's a big step, but I'm pumped. I'm ready.
That's so great.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Well, you've already taken that huge step of putting these thoughts and ideas down into a book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Love to hear a little bit more about your new book, The Craft of Clarity, and what led you to writing it?
I found myself, and I talk about this in the book. So I, as a district instructional specialist, I served both teachers and leaders. And so I went through, and I feel like I kind of was in that position years before being an instructional specialist. Even in the classroom, I was a high achiever, and I often was put on committees or had principals coming to me and saying, we want you to coach so and so and so and so. So I was in this in-between spot, which allowed me to see two narratives on campus. I was able to see teachers' perspectives and narratives, but also the leaders' perspectives and narratives. And so what I constantly heard and continue to hear, even in consulting, is leaders saying people won't get on board with this initiative. We can't get buy-in. People aren't committed. And then on the flip side of that, teachers were saying, we don't know what's going on. Like, we feel like they're just piling more things on our plates, but there was always two different narratives. And over time, I tried to think, how do we get these teams moving in one common direction? Mm-hmm. And I put into place all of these different things I had learned from leadership gurus like Andy Stanley, Simon Sinek, John Maxwell, Peter DeWitt, who I just adore, like all of these different thought leaders, both inside and outside of education. And it formulated into almost like this framework, which ended up becoming the Clarity Cycle framework. And it was 6 steps to create clarity for your people so that we're speaking the same language. We have the same narrative. And it's more than just creating buy-in, but it's about bridging gaps and fostering commitment from your people and creating that sustainable alignment. And in the book, as I'm talking about the Clarity Cycle framework, I'm talking more about building habits of clarity as a leader versus just going through the steps as a one and done. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that as leaders, we've never really explicitly been taught how to create clarity for our people. In fact, in my episode this morning, I was sharing about Brené Brown's phrase, clear is kind. Well, yes, clear is kind, but we can take that concept and approach it in a multitude of ways, none of them being accurate. Like clear as kind doesn't mean having super harsh conversations. It doesn't mean micromanaging your people and telling them where you're going to head. But instead, it is about painting done for your people, casting a vision and scripting critical moves. And that's really what the craft of clarity is all about, because it truly is a craft in leadership.
I was so excited when I saw your title and then did some further investigation, Casey, because on this podcast, I would have to say the 3 words we hear most often from everyone that's joined in talking about a culture of collaboration: clarity, predictability, and consistency, and communication might be that close fourth. All 4 of those. So we would love for you to give us the Coles Notes version. Try and bring that book down into something our listeners can take away. What are those 6 stages, and what does that look like in your clarity cycle, Casey?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I would love to meet with anyone who's listening to this. Man, it is one of my passions and loves to get with you on a call and kind of take you through almost a litmus scale of sorts to help you figure out, like, where are you in these steps. But here are the 6 steps of the clarity cycle framework. And I really want readers and listeners to think about this through the lens of, are these habits that I have built, or are these habits that I need to continue building? So the first step is creating a team, getting your leadership team together. And I say leadership team loosely because I think sometimes we want to stick to administrators within that leadership team. I encourage people to broaden that idea depending on what their focus is. So it's determine who your team members are based on an overall area of focus. So let's determine just one focus. That's step 1. In step 2, we're analyzing that area of focus and we're narrowing down to get to a couple of different goals that align to the focus. And the focus, just so we're clear here, should align to your district or campus vision and mission. So we already are seeing that alignment there. This is a focus that's underneath the umbrella of the district vision, and then your goals underneath the umbrella of the area of focus. And then sometimes what leaders like to do is they like to just go at it and have people working toward this area of focus and goals, but they skip this really important step, which is step number 3, and that is gaining insight. And when our leaders gain insight, they are going out to different stakeholders. They're sharing about the area of focus. They're sharing the goals, and they take the insight that they hear from stakeholders. They analyze that insight and they decide, are these goals appropriate for right here, right now? Or do we need to shift our goals? But also, based on what we're gaining insight from our stakeholders, what are the critical moves that we are going to craft or paint in order to reach the goals in that area of focus? So that takes us to step 4. And step 4 is casting a vision and scripting critical moves. In the book, I talk about vision in depth, and I talk about the 4 parts, like the vision curve, and taking vision from, you're casting the vision, but your people have to conceive of the vision, they have to catch the vision, and then ultimately you want to create vision carriers. So they're carrying the vision. And we're scripting those critical moves. We're thinking, how do we take this macro idea and break it down into micro steps and be transparent with our people about those micro steps? And then the last 2, I'm going to say this 5th step is really a challenge for people. And you guys are going to be really familiar with this challenge. It is providing feedback regularly and celebrating systematically.
Yeah.
Sometimes we provide feedback, but not always regularly, and it's not always tied to the area of focus and goals. Very rarely do we provide celebrations systematically, which is to say we have a system for celebrating, and it's directly tied to our area of focus and goals. And then finally, the last step is deciding how we're going to calibrate and sustain progress. So those are the 6 steps. If I was going to tell you 6 words, it would be focus, analyze, vision, celebrate or feedback, and then calibrate and sustain at the very end.
Wow. And so much. And I know that that's a quick rundown. It's always difficult putting complex frameworks down into concise discussions. But yeah, as you were sharing through this, obviously nodding as we go through.
Sure.
Yeah.
So many through lines to the work that we do as well.
100%.
But having that cycle in place where we can be really targeted in terms of where are we going and what are we focusing on, and then having those processes in place where we can ensure that we are moving along in the same direction and creating that really collaboration in order to get to that end result.
So, Casey, I love the positive message you put into that of vision carriers.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've
Yeah.
heard that, and I really like that idea of how can we create I mean, at a really basic level, I don't believe in the term buy-in, but it could apply here. I often hear leaders go into I can't get people on board with this, which is direct contrast to the vision carriers. What would be your advice to those leaders who just feel like, I feel like we've got those first 3 steps established, or I think we do, but I'm getting past how are others buying into this vision?
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
If you're all about creating a culture of collaboration, then you know clarity is the key to making it work. But let's be real, gaining clarity as a leader isn't always easy. That's where Casey Watts comes in. On Catching Up with Casey, she breaks down what it takes to build cohesive, vision-driven teams with real talk, practical strategies, and a little bit of fun along the way. Tune in live every Monday or catch the replay anytime on your favorite podcast platform.
And now back to our conversation.
Yeah. My initial reaction to that is if you get to vision casting, but you find that you don't have people carrying your vision, chances are you're probably not as equipped at finding your area of focus and gaining insight as you thought you were. And so I would encourage people to revisit gaining insight because if our people aren't carrying the vision, then they're not believing in what the bigger, broader picture and purpose is. And that's only going to be done if we can incorporate their insight into our area of focus and goals and the way that we're going to reach those. And I also would say, too, I think so often when we are scripting critical moves and casting a vision, we forget that people have to have mastery experiences before they can commit. Yep. And it's going to take multiple mastery experiences before they commit. So they have to see progress, which is why that feedback and celebrating systematically is so crucial. And what do we so often forget to do? It's celebrate, or we celebrate, but it's small surface level, tangible things. Yeah. We've got to get to the deeper human side of it.
So to me, it's entirely apparent, Casey, that this isn't a step 1, step 2. Even though you've phrased it as steps, I assume that there's a forward and backward momentum at different points here. A question for you is, when you have that insight step where you're trying to gain the insights of your team, is that a place where we would also incorporate in some data collection as well? So when I hear that, I hear a lot of we're gathering qualitative, how do people feel about this? But then I'd also would imagine that that's a point where we're looking at some quantitative data too, of what is some of our evidence.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. In the book, so I want to say it's in the first and second chapters, I talk a lot about the data that you collect when you're trying to decide what is our primary area of focus. Because what can happen sometimes is leaders will they have the advantage of looking at from that eagle eye view, and they can see everything. Sometimes, though, as leaders, we follow our passions and what we would hope for our campus, but it's not always based on qualitative or quantitative data. And so that is an area where I talk about really analyzing both quantitative and qualitative data, is when you're trying to figure out what will our area of focus be, what makes sense based on the data that we're looking at, what are the goals based on the data that we're looking at. When we go to gain insight, we're really transparent about the data that we've looked at in helping us determine what our area of focus and goals are.
Yeah, and really just becomes a part of the way that we do things, staying true to that cycle.
Yes, 100%. And you're right. Like, you may go back to any part of the clarity cycle framework at any point, and that's part of learning how to calibrate and sustain progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, do you?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in. I'm sure that you see this all the time, and we've read in other literature and seen it. We see it in our own work as well. We've seen in the professional learning community's literature, for instance, the idea of PLC light being LITE. You phrased it as faux collaboration and authentic collaboration. What do you see as the difference, and how do leaders get past the idea of we're dabbling at the surface level of collaboration? They're saying we collaborate, but we understand, no, you've got collegial relations happening, not collaborative.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Are we even going to be able to talk about this in the amount of time that we have?
We will try.
Okay.
It's huge.
Okay. I have my first thought is, man, I totally agree with you. They're like when I hear leaders and teams talk about collaboration among themselves, what they are describing is faux collaboration. And I make it a point to ask teams this questions like, tell me about how you feel about the collaboration on your teams. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're great. We collaborate really well. Okay. What does that look like? Tell me what you mean when you say we collaborate really well. And typically it boils down to this. Well, we share resources. We will make copies for each other. Yeah, we get along. Yes, it's those three things. Typically, there might be a few other things, but I'm like, though that's really just faux collaboration. Of course, I don't point that out in the moment, but it's true. It is just faux collaboration. And I want to say they haven't had any experiences with authentic collaboration, so they don't know how to describe it. And until you've experienced that, then it makes sense for people to believe that they have real, authentic collaboration.
It's interesting because when we engage in that work and ask teachers at different points during the learning of a collaborative response framework that we walk through, it's interesting because the survey results are often higher at the start in relation to how well does your team work together, how well do you collaborate, and then it takes a dip as people realize, oh goodness,
this is not really collaborative.
Kind of different. I was in a meeting last week and we got into a little bit of a debate that was uncomfortable. And actually, we ended up at a way better place than if all of us went quiet. How do you feel about that idea of good collaboration has a tinge of discomfort to it, or a better way to say it is, we should be feeling a little bit uncomfortable when coming into those collaborative conversations if it's true collaboration
because
that's happening.
It pushes us in our thinking and allows us to get to that next step.
Right. Yeah. I love working with teams. I mean, hence the book, right? Yeah. I always tell teams if there's growth and discomfort, and I can guarantee today that there's going to be a little bit of discomfort because I wouldn't be doing my job if you didn't feel a little bit like I was pushing you out of your comfort zone. And, imagine what's happening in the brain when we are pushing back just a little bit. Like that really is, if we're thinking about zone of proximal development, that's where we want to be, right? And I think too, we are going to see people so much more engaged if they can understand, this is collaboration. And it doesn't mean we're having to have hard conversations and get into arguments that are really tense and uncomfortable in that way. But it's uncomfortable in that, I'm growing, I'm learning. They're pushing back on my thinking. I don't love it. But at the same time, I'm understanding more about myself and about them. And it's causing us both to be better for, ultimately, our students. That's what we should be focused on.
But I think this comes into your experiential process of you have to be in it and experience. And, the first time we go through, I didn't like someone pushing back on my ideas. In time, when we can establish things like norms, like clear expectations of how we're interacting, I not only am comfortable with it, I actually start to look forward to it because we're going to end someplace that none of us came into expecting to go potentially.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I often tell people. I know the pushback is always, there's not time for that. But I wish that schools would spend a good chunk of time at the beginning of the year allowing people to get to know each other, but not on like the surface level, not at surface level, but deeper than that. Like, I want to know what your personality type is. I want to know, like, on our team, when these things happen, how are we going to approach it? I want to know on our team, what is it that you need in order to feel valued, empowered, and inspired? Here's what I need. And getting to know each other in that way can alleviate some of the discomfort if you are trying to create these really productive, high energy PLCs.
When you think about, you talked earlier about habits and creating those habits, it's very difficult for you to do that without having the groundwork done of getting to know each other and really establishing our groundwork for being together.
And this is consistent with what Patrick Lencioni talks about in creating high impact teams. Ray Dalio talked about it within his company, how we built, I think the example there is baseball cards that would help people understand the inner workings of each individual. But I find it fascinating what you say there, because how many times do we hear teachers say at the beginning of the year, I got to get into my curriculum. I don't have time to set the routines. And yet I'm going to use an elementary classroom as an example. We all know the most impactful elementary classrooms are the ones that start at the beginning of the year and sets routines. They practice. They learn about one another. They
build relationships.
Set really clear expectations. And then we're going to really dig into the learning. And we'll get so much further than if we didn't have some of that in place. Same thing.
Yes.
Applies.
Yeah, absolutely the same thing. I even think about that with norms. When I'm presenting, and I have like a split second where I talk about norms, but really I tell people, you could spend a full 2 hours thinking about, learning about, and developing norms. Because when I started asking people, when I first started consulting, and even as an instructional specialist, when I started asking teams, like, let's talk about the norms we need to set for the work we're about to do. Oh my gosh, sometimes it was just crickets. Like, what do you mean by norms? Or it was the flip side of that, where we're just setting rules that don't really align with the work that we're doing. And I think there's like a disconnect between what norms are versus what rules are, and how powerful they really can be.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take a stab at this, because in your book, you talk about intermundium. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. We want to know more about that. Share that with us, and how it, in your mind, again, impacts the collaborative capacity of our teams.
Yeah.
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Do the people in your organization function as a group or a team? We used to use these words interchangeably, but discovered there's a significant difference when we operate as a group versus when we operate as a team. So, what's the difference? Access the Are We a Group or a Team activity to engage your staff in understanding if they are functioning as a group or team, part of our Collaborative Leaders Toolkit series. In this workshop guide, you'll clearly define the impact of working as a team and the conditions necessary to establish those effective teams. This workshop guide is yours for only $9, and you'll receive everything you need to lead your staff, including workshop slides, participant handout, step-by-step instructions for leading this activity, as well as suggestions for next steps and possible extension suggestions. Go to bit.ly/J group team to access, or search for it under the resources tab on jigsawlearning.ca to learn more about this valuable resource to reinforce why we need to be working in teams to ensure success for each and every learner.
And now back to our conversation.
Yeah. So, I talked earlier in this episode about being that in between the teachers and leaders and hearing both perspectives, almost as like I was watching two different, like the same movie, but from two different perspectives. And that's what intermundium means. So in fiction writing, authors often call that world in between as the intermundium. And you often can see it too as a reader who's just kind of reading a book that pivots back and forth between two different characters. And so that's where I have found myself in that intermundium space. But I think so many people find themselves there, and sometimes they don't even realize it. I think leaders can even find themselves there in between what they're hearing from their staff and what the district is pushing. And so, or the curriculum department, like I've been part of the curriculum department, and leaders stuck in the middle where they're trying to get teachers on board with what curriculum department is saying. Hey, this is what we're going to be doing. But everyone experiences that. And without clarity, we are unable to patch those stories together and create a clear, cohesive narrative.
Which is essential for moving forward on the work that they're doing together.
Yeah. Yes, 100%.
So Casey, we always ask this question of every guest that we have on our podcast, and it will have you thinking a little bit.
Okay.
If you knew then what you know now, what advice would you give to your past self in relation to establishing and sustaining highly impactful collaborative practices?
Oh, man. Just too many things. Can we stay on and I'll just drink this coffee? We'll list them out.
Okay, we're going to limit you to 3 then, Casey.
Okay. Really, if I knew then what I know now, what I would hope for my past self is that I would favor collaboration over competition. And I know that not everyone experiences this, but I tend to be a bit of a high achiever. I'm an Enneagram 3, and I can go, 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 go. But because of that, and obviously I'm writing this book about casting vision and getting people to commit to working towards your goals. But I am at heart a visionary and futuristic. But because of that, I tend to pull people too fast and too strong, or push them too fast, too strong. And I notice that even in like my day-to-day life as a mom, a wife, a friend, I see potential in people and things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you could do this, 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 and this. So let's go for it. Let's do it. But if I had known then what I know now about the importance of getting to know people at their core, including myself, then I probably would have been so much better at understanding that I need to know their characteristics. I need to know their geniuses. I need to understand mine. And then I can figure out how we can collaboratively move forward. Instead of, I'm going to reach all of these goals, and then I'm going to pull people where I think they should go. So I think that's probably what I would say to my past self.
Well, that's a great reflection.
Thanks. Still working on it.
Always. So, Casey, you mentioned before about people being able to hop on with a call, and you've, for those that are watching, not just listening, you flashed up the book a couple of times. Can you tell us how people can get in touch with you and how they can get their hands on The Craft of Clarity?
Yeah. So the book is on Amazon. It's also on Barnes & Noble website. So you can just type in the search bar, Craft of Clarity. It should pop up. And you can get it right now in Kindle, paperback, or hardback cover. Okay. I am getting closer to getting it on Audible for those of you who really just like to listen to audiobooks. And then people can reach out to me either on LinkedIn. That's where I am primarily as far as social media goes. Or you can go to my website, catchingupwithcasey.com, and connect with me there.
All right.
Excellent.
We will make sure to include that in the show notes then as well. So Casey, wishing you all the best as you have some moves coming for yourself in the next few months. And it's been a pleasure getting to connect with you on this podcast.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining us. It's been wonderful.
Awesome. And likewise, guys, this has been so much fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care.
So that was a great conversation with Casey, and just coming from a different perspective in work. But as we were chatting with her off camera, really reflecting on how much our work and her work intersects with each other.
So let's break into some of the things that really stood out. And of course, common themes that we've heard throughout different podcast episodes, but some things that stood out for me is I love that idea of collaboration over competition.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds so straightforward, but we know competition doesn't always look like who's winning.
No.
It's about I can look a little bit better in my performance in a classroom, in my instruction, as opposed to someone else. If I help out someone, and how many times have we heard that? Thankfully, it's been a number of years since I have heard it, but the little bit of, well, you kind of have to, as a young teacher, for example, earn your licks. I'm not willing to share out some of the things that I do because nobody did that with me. And that's a really competitive way to look at things. If we can collaborate, we're all going to get stronger.
Or the opposite of that, in that, I'm such an experienced, wonderful teacher that I'm going to share all my lesson plans with you, all my unit plans, but just use them as they are, because they're great.
Yep.
It's that
one-sided
competitive feel. Yeah. The other thing she talked quite a bit about is, we hear leaders often talk about buy-in, and we try to veer away from that language just because it's not a very accurate reflection of what's actually going on.
And even the terminology of buy-in is almost that you're selling something that people are buying.
Yeah, and it's not that at all. It's about what we do to gain understanding about our vision. And as she talked about those 6 steps, understanding that, articulating that vision, but then moving into a place where I love this, about being able to get insights and really focus in on, what is our understanding about that particular area of focus? What do we know? What do we need to learn? What do the rest of the people in our building understand about that particular area? I really appreciate that idea of insights, because it does help us to formulate then our next steps.
I wonder if we could encourage every leader that is listening to this to stop looking for buy-in and rather about growing your vision carriers. I love that language. That's something I would be using all the time we're trying to grow our vision carriers. We're not trying to get buy-in. It's a different way of looking at that, but I think it's really powerful. I really and again, this is no secret that we hear over and over and over again that part of building a culture of collaboration is about relationships, knowing one another. But even her saying, you have to be willing to invest the time in order to do that. And if you're really going to collaborate at a deep level, there's some work that needs to happen about knowing one another, learning your team. What are the pain points that people have? What are their perceived strengths? And what are things that frustrate one another? Just like I mentioned in the episode, a teacher starts the year off in their classroom trying to establish those routines, expectations, and relationships. We should be doing that in our organization as well.
Yeah. Another thing that she talked about that I loved her analogy of having a ladder that goes flat, and that instead of, the expectation is that you start out as a teacher and then you do that for a number of years, and then you move into, a coach or a learning support teacher, and then you move on to maybe a VP or principal, and just that idea of that onward movement. But really thinking about, where are you happiest? Where do you find the most joy? And that might not mean climbing a ladder.
No,
We know a lot
providing
of
value.
teachers
Yeah.
who have been teachers for 38 years, 39
Yep.
years, and happy to be there and happy to be in that space. And that's great.
Well, and I think too, in those situations, and I know some of the exact people that you're thinking of as well, you're still highly engaged in that collaborative culture because you're contributing, you're growing one another, you're growing as an individual, which I think is critical. So we will include some resources and number of things that Casey talked about, including link to her book in the show notes. We talked about the importance of establishing norms. We're going to include in a free guide that will help leaders to be able to do that really effectively and concisely for their teams. As always, share out, subscribe, share with us any questions, comments that you may have. And we hope that this episode has, again, provided some further insights to help deepen how you go about leading and sustaining a culture of collaboration. So we wish you all the best and hope to engage with you in a future episode.
See you soon.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.